All right, we're going to be working on our Unit 8 assignment, and this focuses around indexing of databases, and this is kind of a new concept for us, but the concept of indexing a database is, I think, a relatively simplistic one in terms of the principle of it, and in terms of the actual methodology and data structures that are used to accomplish that becomes a whole different thing, and in fact, that can get pretty complex. The fact that we set up a primary key for any table, enforcing that we have a unique value in any particular column that uniquely identifies any column, that's a form of indexing right there. All right, we're going to play with some of the exercises that they have for us here. And the first thing that we're going to do is, well, let's get that document open. And it says that it would like us to create a new database. So let's do that step. I'm going to go into my SQL Server Management Studio here, create a new query window, and we are just going to type the command create database, and they want us to call it index DB, like this. Let's go ahead and create it. And now we're ready to work on the exercises. Okay, so the first thing that we'll have to do beyond that is build all the tables that we need, and these are going to take a little bit of time, but now we have some practice with this. This should go fairly quick. This first one, we have a number of different columns to create. The data types are all provided, which is very helpful. And so let's go ahead, let's put in a use command to start with here. And then do our first table command. I'm going to do a refresh. Notice how, it's always that weird fact that it doesn't always pick up the new database immediately. I think that's really strange. Let's go ahead and come back to the query now and execute it. All right, so now we have table. Let's just verify that it's there. And there it is. All right, so that's the employees table, and let's paste that into our document. Nothing too tricky there. Any questions on that one at all? I would anticipate not at this point. Just be really methodical about how you proceed. All the data types are provided, so it shouldn't be too bad. Next one that we're going to build is a rooms table. And for the most part, this is pretty consistent, pretty simple. Just paste this in and then talk about how we might look at this. So a lot of these are just character fields, but we do have one for money, and there's a default amount of $75.85, and that's for the rate. And then they also have this thing at the bottom, available bit default 0. Now, what would you anticipate that column is used for if you were to guess? All right, I know you're all going to rush in and answer it, but if you think about this in terms of, let's say, maybe a hotel, and you start to look at some of the columns that we're working with here, then it starts to make a little bit more sense. So apparently they have like a default hotel rate. That's what the rate field is about. And then you have the availability of the room, which is basically, it's a true false, right? So they're setting it to a bit, which is going to be either 1 or 0. 0 means it's not available, and then a 1 would mean that it is. Pretty simple.
What's the meaning of the default thing?
What's the meaning of the default here?
No, and then by the 97, yeah, what's the N for what?
The N is just a identifier in terms of kind of like another way to identify that same thing. So it's just kind of like a pseudonym for what you see coming in here. So
So
for
can I still type value, like default value? Is that the same?
it is, it is. That's exactly what it is. It's just a different way to designate it. They're just putting the N in front of it as kind of like a pseudonym for it, kind of like an alias. I don't know if that term makes sense to you, but kind of like in some of the other things that we were doing, where we're adding single letters to represent certain constructs just to make it easier to identify them in the aftermath.
Okay.
So along those lines, and this is going to give away that I haven't had a chance to read yet, but the N varchar, what is that different than a regular varchar?
Well, it basically allows for a combination of different character types to be put in there. So it allows for an extended character set. It is really kind of the long and short of it. So it's going to allow for some special characters to be included in that character set, whereas like a standard varchar may or may not, depending on what those are. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, without getting too technical about it. I guess for all intents and purposes, when I look at that, I think that maybe a varchar would be just fine here, but they must have had some thinking that there might be some more complex information that's thrown in there somehow that would designate a room differently to make that choice. I see some people will tend to use this as a data type for varchar always, because it doesn't limit them as to what they can put into the field as much as the regular varchar can. But from my perspective, varchar covers almost every scenario. So I can see why they do it, but it's not necessarily required, if that makes any sort of sense. Hopefully that's helpful. Did we execute this one? I forget. I don't think. No, not yet. Oh, we did execute it. Okay. So that answers that question. Nothing like an error message to set you straight, right, and keep you in check. All right, let's move on. And now it's wanting us to start inserting records into the table. So here we have an employee with an employee number, name, obviously James Bond here. And James Bond only makes $28 an hour, just so you know, if it doesn't pay to be a spy these days. But he does get a nice car to drive. So let's build that into a command that will look like this, pulling straight from the table. Notice the N sitting in front of each one of these. Now, there's a kind of a little bit of an issue here with how that, and I guess it's a matter of definition, and I'm not maybe perhaps using the formal definitions for these things, but the N character preceding each one of these names. Why would I go to the trouble of putting that in there? What's the point of that? Okay. Well, the point of it is to indicate the form of indexing that's going to take place on top of these. So, we're kind of like, in this day of the pandemic, we're kind of going right into doing the work without having the lecture part of it, which I assume that you guys are picking up from all the videos and the readings. But it really is an indicator on the type of indexing that we're putting in. And this is indicating basically that we're doing a type of index that is not clustered and not necessarily unique, but we're still indexing it. But remember, the point of indexing is so that you can find things more quickly. So you order things in a number of different ways, you catalog them, and it seems kind of backwards because you're already putting stuff in a table. So how would creating an index for a table help you find something? Well, if there's only a little bit of data, it doesn't matter much. If there's a significant amount of data, it allows you to do things that are, kind of silly. So, for example, if I was to look at let's say my file system. Okay, so I have a file window here that I'm going to pull over, and it's organized by a bunch of different ways. And if I happen to hit the refresh on this, it refreshes pretty quick. And what am I sorting by? I'm sorting by the date modified. So I always have, in my downloads folder, all the newest stuff is at the top, and the stuff I've been pulling off of Blackboard has been pulling down that way. And if I go and decide now to change my view or what I'm looking at by clicking on the name column, and now it's starting to sort by name and by date modified, it changes it. And so what it's really doing is it's looking at some sort of a algorithm for sorting these. There are times when you come into these file windows, for example, and I'm sure you've experienced it, where maybe you're trying to look at something in a folder, and then maybe you click one of these columns if you've never clicked it before, and then you see this green progress bar starts to go across. And what's happening on the fly, if you're wondering why it's taking so long, come on, just sort by date. What's your problem? Really what's happening in the background is it's creating an index that's sorting it by date so that it can display it correctly. It just hasn't done it before. So it's building that index. But once the index is built, you can come in here, you can click this thing backwards and forwards all you want, and it will be almost instantaneous because the sort order's already been determined. It's just a matter of putting it on screen. So that's what it's helping us do from a conceptual standpoint. So let's go ahead and execute this. I forget where we left off here. So this is not liking that, is it? And Nancy, you're laughing at me. All right, now I have to check to make sure that all the stuff that we put in.
That's a high level.
Oh, it's not that high a level. So I'm checking my database here to see if my tables. Okay, I got employees. We got rooms. Checking our columns. I don't see any problem there. Let's just try running it again, as often seems to be the case with SQL Server. And now it worked, right? Okay, so we're good. And I'm sorry I jump into panic mode sometimes, because I just always want to work on that first try. Goofy system sometimes. All right, let's get that command pasted into the document. Now the next step is where we actually start to do some indexing, and it says create the following index in the employee number column of table employees. It says, so run this command. So it's telling you what to run. It's not something that you're just inventing. And let's take a look at the syntax of it. It just says create index. We give that index a name. What are we indexing? We're indexing employees based on employee numbers. So if you had 10,000 employees, they all had their employee number, and then you create an index so you can look them up faster. Let's go ahead and run that, and you can see it completed successfully. Of course, it's going to be really fast. We've only got one SPY in our database, so now the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to run that command that they indicate here to figure out that yes, indeed, we did create the index, and if you guys remember this command, I'm pasting it over. It's an exec command. And then that tells us in its output what kind of index it is. It says non-clustered located on primary. Okay, so a non-clustered index, and by its nature, is also going to be a non-unique index. It's not really necessarily looking to make sure that each entry in there is unique. It's just sorting them. So it is possible, so if you think about like a file system, for example, going back to that, to have, depending on your file system, mind you, to have stuff that might have the same file names and still be in the same folder. So now that's kind of weird. Like Windows and the Macintosh typically will not let you do that. Interesting thing is Linux and Unix systems will let you do that, and the way that they keep the files separate is they recognize that, oh wait, it's got the same name, but it's got a different timestamp, it's got a different file size, it's got a different ID number, so it sees it all as different stuff, even though the name's the same. The name, if you're indexing based on the name, and the name is the primary field, that, obviously it can't be duplicated. But in this case, a non-unique one falls into that category. So this is the command that you would type into that subsequent window if you want to type the command in, and then you could say non-clustered. And if you want to be, particular about it, you could also say non-unique. But it's really the first part that I'm looking for there. In number 5, it says insert the following employee record into the employees table. So we're adding another employee. So let's add this one in. It's pretty simple. I can just copy the code over. Alright, I'm just copying it straight from the table. Let's execute that. And it added it. And then it asks us, okay, what our command was. That was pretty simple, I thought. And was it successful? And it was. It was, yes. Or however you want to put it in there. And then if it didn't work, they would want to know why, but in this case it worked. And you can see, from the format from like the James Bond one, it's the same exact format, and it worked just fine. Alright. Next thing that they want us to do is practice dropping an index. Sometimes in order to make a database work as well as it can work, and this is the functional reason for why I've ever done it, is sometimes you have an index, and depending on the way that data was put into the database, sometimes data is added, and by virtue of whatever method it was added, sometimes it doesn't get indexed. So sometimes you have to re-index things, and then it helps, if you're using the same names for your indexes, to drop it and recreate it, or in some cases just drop it before you create a new one. And if you are going to drop an index from your database, and what I'm going to do here is show you the command first. You just simply call it out by name. How do we know which one that we're grabbing? Well, this is related to excuse me, the employee table, and then you can see the index right here. And here's an indicator here, and I don't know why it didn't pop in my head. It also indicates non-unique and non-clustered here. And then all I have to do is basically call that by name. The first part of that here is the name, and remove it. So the table, and then the index, and then go ahead and execute. Oh. You see what I did there? I highlighted it. Yeah. All right. So be careful of that. All right, and there it is. So it worked just fine. And let's paste that into the document too. Now I'm hoping that maybe as I'm working here, you guys are getting some of this typed in or trying it as we go. Some of it's not too bad. I know that the copy paste is kind of a little bit of a cheat relative to the way you guys are working. So, all right. So the next one says create a new clustered index called employees clustered based on the employee number column of the table employees. All right. So a clustered index allows us to have some other capabilities that we don't typically get. And then to create a clustered index, you just simply have to call it by name. So in this case, the command will look like this. It'll say create clustered index, give it the name that they gave us, and which table and column number we're working with. All right, I'm going to go ahead and execute that. And you can see that succeeded. I'm going to come over here on the Object Explorer side and do a refresh here. And what I'm looking for is that all of this stuff is refreshed. So when I expand it, now we can see the clustered index right there. So that's our command. Paste that one in. All right. And it says what kind of index. Well, we asked for it, so I guess we can say clustered. That's a pretty easy one. So hopefully, and so I know some of these assignments, some of them are very simplistic and some of them are pretty challenging, and it's all in the nuance. But that wasn't too bad. All right. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to run an alter command here because it's telling us to. It says alter the employees table and add a primary key constraint called PK employee number on the employee number column. So let's do that step first. Here is the command to execute that. So alter table employees, add constraint. You can see it's a primary key. We're giving it a name. We're basing it on employee number. And it worked. All right, so let's take this code and paste it back into the document. I'm missing the first line there, right? Okay. Sorry, color coding's not there. Was it successful? Yep, it worked. And then what type of index is the primary key? So really what they want you to do here is not only create it, but then come back here and then take a look and see what kind of index. Well, it doesn't say. Well, well, I guess we're not looking under that. Are we really seeing that information here? And this is always what's kind of weird is this whole refresh thing can kind of be a little bit strange. Aha. Okay, so you see how just a refresh, but the whole point is so that you can see that information. So you can see the fact, by virtue of the fact that we add a primary key, the primary key in essence then becomes an index. So in order to index anything, it has to become an entity that is tracked in a certain way. Now I kind of gave the file example, where sometimes you can have stuff that is identical but has differences in it. And you think of like even working with object-oriented programming where you instantiate a class but it's its own unique thing even though it's the same thing, but it's that approach. The primary key by its nature is an index, and it is an index that enforces uniqueness. So the previous ones that we were kind of goofing around with, they were not unique. So you could have repeated values, But this is unique and non-clustered. So that's really kind of the answer here. So the answer for that particular thing, I would say non-clustered and unique. That's really all you need there. Okay. Number 9 says drop both of the following indexes. Okay, well that seems pretty simple. Question is, how do you do that? All right, so we had 2 different ways to add them, and therefore 2 different ways to remove them, because the one is just an index we created to help keep track of things. This one, I'm going to go ahead and just do a drop command. The other one we put in there by virtue of creating it as a primary key, and because it's a primary key, it's also, by its nature it's a constraint, so we have to use the alter command to get rid of that constraint. Because it's a primary key, it requires that approach, and we should be able to execute both of these together, and we were. And then what they would like to do is have us verify that that succeeded. First, I'm going to copy my code over, so I'm going to just paste that here, and then the command that we use to verify is this one, the exec command. Let's go ahead and run that and look for what output. And then what I would do is I would just, paste that in to the window here. So I actually do this, and then you can just take that output message, if you were so inclined, and just paste it in. Hopefully no questions so far. This stuff is more difficult from a conceptual standpoint in terms of a functional one, getting something indexed. When it comes to working with large databases and making them as efficient as possible, what you will discover is indexing becomes really, really critical to getting that efficiency. Okay, number 10 says recreate the primary key. All right, so I don't know why they would have us delete it and then re-add it. I think it's just for practice. All right, so we would do that by doing this command. Same thing we did before. So we're going to execute, and let's get that command back in there. All right. And now it's saying, what kind of primary key is it this time? All right. Now, this is kind of an interesting little exercise in that we, the first time around, we added an index and then we put in the primary key. Now this time we're putting in the primary key and then checking to see what the difference is. So we ran this command, it worked, right? And let's just make sure it worked, because they're asking us questions about it, so I always like to do this. So we got that in there. And it says what type of index is the primary key this time after you run this command. So really what you should do is you should probably do this command again, the exec command. Let's run that. And what I think is probably good to, for response, is you could copy that in there. Maybe say type equals that. So So it's clustered, it's unique, and it's a primary key. So unique, I mean, that's a pretty easy one to understand. Clustered is one that might be a little more fuzzy for you in terms of conceptually, but it is a thing that does help it to accelerate performance in essence. All right. It says recreate the clustered index, same command from step number 7. All right, so let's go get number 7. All right, that's our command. And now they're going to ask us, did it work? And we execute. All right, and you see what the current thing does here. It says you can't create more than one clustered index on the table, and that's really kind of the point of that little exercise. So when we get back down here, you can say no, and then just paste that in, that error message. So tables don't like to have more than one cluster. Now this explains why we did it the other way around to start with. So we create the clustered one, then we created the primary key, and then the primary key could exist, but it couldn't be clustered. However, if we do it the other way around, then the primary key becomes the cluster, and the rest of it doesn't. And it's all about performance, folks. So there's some reasons why sometimes you do want the primary key to be clustered, and sometimes you do not. It really just kind of depends on the functionality of what you're doing. So that was the issue there. And it says, insert the following record into the rooms table. So we need to write that one. And this has a couple of things going on here. So with 12, we got to get the records in here. So we got 2 sets of values, and you can actually do this kind of as a compound like this, right? As long as they're in the right order, presented the right way. And it seems to me it's not seeing the database, so I'm going to type this in there just to be on the safe side. Let's go ahead and execute. And it says cannot insert null into column room ID. The column does not allow nulls, insert fails. Wonderful. All right. So let's see why it's doing that. So with rooms, and columns, got room ID, room number, location code, room type. Oh, I see what the problem is. So you guys see what the problem is?
Use the back type? No. Use the room type?
Well, the room type, this is the room type. Well, actually, the room type is this. This is the room type. This is the location code. We're actually missing the room number. See, so the first one is room ID. So I think what we need to do to fix this, and I'm not, it's kind of interesting that this is like the answer file that I'm looking at. So room number, oh, so what we don't have is the room ID. So apparently this is the room number, right? How do I know that that's the room number?
We have it listed at the top there, which fields we're plugging in.
Yep. Well, exactly. But the database, oh yeah, it is listed there, isn't it, Brenda?
So we don't have enough fields for what we say we're putting in.
Insert into rooms, room number, location code.
Oh, okay, we do. Sorry.
Yeah, it seems like it's all jiving to me. For a moment, I was kind of ignoring this, thinking we're just, that wasn't there and we're missing the ID.
That's what it is. I just created an ID that's the same as the room number.
So you just added a column in front of this?
Yeah, and then it worked. Yeah, I added a room ID on the top for the column, and then made the room ID the same as the room number. That's the only way I could get it to work. But you have to put the room ID on the top too for the column.
Is the room ID supposed to be, oh gosh, now I forget what the term is for it.
Like auto-generating?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I keep looking at this and my brain tells me that there's nothing wrong with this. I'm just trying to see if there's a syntactic thing here that's breaking it. So I'm looking at all the column names. Somebody's dog is barking.
Oh, sorry, that's mine.
It was mine before, but not now. I know, all the pets aren't going to know what to do when we finally go back to work.
Right, that's kind of the joke these days. The cats are annoyed, but the dogs are happy. And right now, we don't have a dog, so... Which is kind of a... we're good. We're good.
Like, if I am struggling to put up with my pets at home, it's lucky I don't have children.
Yeah, I'm like rereading and checking the examples here. I'm gonna actually pull up my SQL code file. So I have like a completed document version of this, and then I also have the actual SQL commands, which is what I'm grabbing right now. And we're on number 12, is that correct? No, we're beyond that, aren't we? We're much beyond that.
Yes. Yes, good job.
Yeah, this may have... Okay, so my SQL file, I think, is different. Now, this is really strange. I'm going to copy this in from a different source. And for whatever reason, I've seen this, and sure enough, I mean, this is the same code, right? But it's still underlining. Yeah. And I think I'm going to go with Jill's strategy, because I don't see any other way to make it work right now.
But is it supposed to be a surrogate key, but when we didn't create that, or when we created that table, we didn't put that identity thing in there?
Yeah, that could be, Brenda. That could be. So you're saying we're doing...
Let's do it this way for now.
Yeah. But it's still... They're still underlining. Yeah, so somehow the objects aren't tying together. The first command should have worked. I just find it fascinating sometimes how quirky this technology is. All right, so we have that in there. And, you know, that's a little bit of a hack what we just did, but hey, you know, you get it to work, you get it to work. All right, now it says, create a unique non-clustered index called blah 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 on the room number column table of rooms. All right, so that next command is going to be this one. All right, that's it. I should have done it here. I like to get that color coding in there. Once again, the objects aren't identifying, but the commands are working. So now we created the index. Let's see if it indeed did create. All right, and there it is. Unique, non-clustered. So we did get the command in the document already, right? It says insert the following record to the rooms table. So once again, we have the same situation, and I anticipate, of course, the same issue. So we know how to contend with it, I guess, if we run into it. Let's see if it works this time. All right. Yeah, it just doesn't like it without the room ID. For whatever reason, it's not identifying this as an object. Now, we know that this is going to cause a problem, right? What's the problem it's going to cause? This room number is already taken, right? Right. So it cannot insert a duplicate is what the problem is. So if we try to get that value in there, and then the result of that, of course, is going to be no. Was it successful? And you can just say no, and then if you want, you can, you can copy that whole statement if you wish, and just paste it in there. All right. Now, if it would have had a different value here, would it have worked? Absolutely. Once again, let's go ahead, and it's asking us to delete the index, and that's going to work. Same one that we just put together. Did it work? And then the result of that is yes. All right, so that wraps this assignment too. Let's do the same thing that we did before. Let's take another 5-minute break. I will once again refresh my coffee because I'm going through it like crazy here. Seems to be needed this morning. And we'll come back in 5. So we'll resume at like 11:17. All right? And then I will take this video and get it rendering. All right. Talk to you in a few.